How are bold ideas born and which ones survive to eventually shake up the status quo? We'll hear straight from our industry's greatest visionaries who are making waves and learn how they turned their dreams into disruptive reality. This is From Dreamers to Disruptors, a podcast powered by Medidata. Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining another episode of the podcast at Medidata, From Dreamers to Disruptors. I could not be more pleased to be welcoming Marisa Co here today as my guest. And Marisa, there's so many different things that I know we're going to touch on in this podcast today, as you and I have been crisscrossing paths and overlapping for a long time. I don't know if we're going to admit how long, but a very long time in this industry.
Decades.
Decades. Decades is a good way to round it. Yeah. And we've had some close engagement over that time around taking dreams and turning them into disruptions, which is why I thought you were going to be just perfect for this podcast. And we were very happy to have you agree to come kind of tell some of those stories today. But before we dive into all of that, I thought it would be, because you've been around the industry for a long time and you've worn a lot of hats, you've done a lot of special things.
Yes, I have.
You've made a lot of marks, I would say, on our industry.
I hope.
You have. So maybe if you don't mind just starting for our audience and just maybe summing up your career a little bit, if you will, tell us the story.
Sure. First and foremost, thank you for the invitation. I'm delighted to be here. I'm humble that you thought of me to kick off your podcast. 40 years in this industry, so it's a long time. I've seen quite a bit. And my story is quite simple, actually. I was a PharmD in Argentina, and I wanted to be a general manager. And somebody very close to me, one of my mentors, said, "You will never be a general manager if you don't understand every function that you will later lead." That's the way you build trust, the way you build credibility. And so that's what I did. I started my career in manufacturing, moved to regulatory sales training, marketing, and got my MBA at UCLA, and I started in finance at Amgen. And one of the finance function was supporting clinical and medical affairs. I was then supporting research and preclinical, which is more in line with my background. And I went to the head of clinical operations and I said, "Sally, I have no idea what you do for a living, but I'm a quick learner and I want to really learn deeply about clinical operations." So we were in the midst of reorganizing one of the many or reorganizations that the industry has every few years, seem more often now. And she put me onto 28 different work streams. So I was learning CRF development, protocol development, data cleanup, and I felt like I had no idea what I was doing. Felt like drinking from the fire hose. But as a finance person, really understanding the depth of the operations actually gave me an enormous ability to understand where the inefficiencies are and the potential for that. So I fell in love with clinical operations, with clinical research. And ever since, I stayed within clinical research and in different functions, whether in finance or in analytics, procurement. I've done quite a bit of things. In 2007, I left industry for the first time and needed a breather. And I started joining different angel investment groups and being exposed to different technologies and innovation. And I fell in love with what I was seeing. And that's when I was introduced to Dr. Susan Love, right, the famous breast cancer doctor, and she had invested in a company called 1747 that was trying to to build a clinical trial online with the hope to give better access to patients on clinical research. And I thought this was 2008, the debacle, the financial debacle. Everybody was cutting cost. And I thought, this is a phenomenal idea. And I contacted the trialist, Dr. Cummins. And I said, this is a perfect time to actually build such a company. It will be disruptive. Nobody will believe that we could do this, but I think we could do it. And we assembled a team of titans. And we were 7 volunteers. Andy Lee from Nielsen Merck, Peter Benton from Worldwide Clinical, Craig Leptis, Dr. Cummins. And we needed to really think through how would we do a clinical trial online. The internet was not what it is today. So imagine the hurdles, the mountain that we had to overcome. And that's where the idea of the first clinical trial online under an IND came about. And we built Mytrus. And that was really the first, probably my proudest moment in the industry, because everybody will tell me that it couldn't be done. And against all odds, the idea picked up, and we had Pfizer working with us, very interested in assessing this idea, and a seed investor that was willing to actually write a little check. But we had no CEO. That's when we all thought, after you took next trials through the finish line, we thought of you, and we snatched you to be the CEO. So we were a CEO and 7 volunteers starting a company back in 2009.
Yeah. Well, and one of my proudest moments too, and throughout my career, and I remember that the day that Peter Benton called me and said, you got to have dinner with Steve Cummings and talk about this idea for a startup. And I think it was only a couple weeks after that the company was founded. I actually wasn't the first CEO. The first CEO was Manish. Yeah, Manish Katari.
That's right.
Was the CEO, and I was the COO and one of the co-founders with him and Steve and all the rest of you. And but you're right, that at the time that was one of those disruptive ideas that we love to focus on in the podcast, because it sort of seems obvious now that there should be all of these ways of engaging patients more directly on clinical trials and collecting more continuous data from home and all of these things. And I want to get to in a few minutes kind of what sorts of disruptions you have seen throughout your career that have really started to stick. But I think the Mytrus story is a great story because it really was disruptive at the time. We call them virtual trials. Before they were called decentralized trials.
That's right.
And even decentralized trials needed a real boost from COVID to, kind of force the industry into very broad adoption.
Yeah.
And many other startups came along with a similar model. From Science 37, I think was first, and then Medable came along, and decentralized trials and technology sort of picked up the speed over time.
That's right.
But Mytrus was there with Pfizer and Synarch, who was our first investor, later becoming BioClinica. And that was the group, the kind of 3 parties that jointly formed Mytrus and kicked off that part of new innovation.
Well, let's face it. We proved a concept that was thought to be impossible.
Yep.
Right? So I remember talking to heads of clinical operations and them telling me there's no way. It will never happen. I have the words kind of stuck in my mind. And that's the worst that you can tell me. It will never happen.
That's when you dig in.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. And think about all the the stuff that we had to overcome, right? So the internet was not there, right? It was like what, 60% in the US, 60% penetration of the internet in the US, in the low 20s in Europe. So we were creating a model where you will have patient enrollment, patient access through the internet, consented, and starting participating. Then the logistics of getting a mega site, which that what Mytrus was, and the super PI, and thinking through all the processes. I remember with the think tanks thinking about every single detail of the process, right? How we would do that, how we would ship iPads, right, to the different sites to sign a consent. I mean, sponsors were like, oh my God, this is a logistical nightmare. How would we ship iPads to ex-US? How would we convince the EMEA to actually look at this eConsent from a different angle? I remember even before you guys joined, we were talking to Bob Temple at the FDA about the eConsent. And because, we wanted to ensure that the FDA will be supportive of this. And he looked at us, kind of Steve Cummins and a bunch of us that were there, and said, it took decades for somebody to figure out that the patients don't want to read a 150-page protocol, and every 10 words they say, you may die from this. How about the informed consent? And the idea of having an iPad that would explain this with icons and in very simple way. Actually, for Bob Temple, he said, what took so long, right? And this is precedent setting. This is what Bob said.
I remember.
And this was really a turning point in the industry, because having the FDA supportive of what we were doing was probably a very heavy a very heavy impulse to the FDA, to the industry, a very heavy signal to the industry.
Like an endorsement almost of
that this is actually possible. And it was the same with the trial, right? Having the FDA say, go ahead, do it. The first trial with Detrol, that was completely virtual. Having the endorsement of the FDA was probably changing the paradigm that then will subsequently give rise to other companies that actually did the same or parts of it. But I think Mytrus was really the impulse for, there's another way to do it. And of course, either virtual or semi-virtual trials, it's not for everything, right? It's not for every trial. It's not for every drug. But more and more, there's absolutely no reason to do conventional trials in things like safety studies. There's absolutely no element that cannot be derived by AI. So why do we continue to do what we've ever done, hoping to get a different result? Isn't that the definition of insanity?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I think, one of the great things about Mytrus and the way it started, it's kind of a dream scenario if, those folks in our audience that are running startups or thinking about starting a company, you almost never get a chance like this where it's a major industry innovation. You've got titans, as you describe them, around the industry that are backing it. You've got a huge client. Pfizer agreed to be the first customer and to run a major study under an IND to experiment with this new method that regulatory agencies are buying in, and you have an investor. It's like you've got the 5 pieces of the making of the magic that are the difference between a startup working and not working. And it really all came together. And you're right. We laid some groundwork. Lots of other companies followed. They evolved the model. The technology got better and better. The use of, smartphones around the world made a big leap possible for at-home patient data capture. And I think a lot of things over the next 10 years really change to grease the skids, if you will, for this type of technology to be used. But at the same time, and I wonder if, maybe this can help us get into some of the other things like Mytrus that you've seen in your career, or places where you feel like we really have done something right and moved mountains or made a big difference. As much luck as we had with the timing of Mytrus and the team that all put it together, and we really innovated eConsent. We had the first eConsent that was approved by FDA. We had the first virtual trial under an IND that was approved. And we had the first, I don't know if you remember this, but we had the first approval ever for shipping study supplies directly to patients at home, which had never been done before, because we were sending an investigational drug to patients at home to take on their own, right? That was very new and innovative at the time. So even with all of those great innovations and a technology that could really change the market, still things like eConsent have been relatively slow in an adoption curve. I mean, even today, 2025, we still have a very low overall percentage of trials that are using electronic consent. So just to make the point that you can get something new and innovative and validated by lots of different parts of the market, and still in our industry have a very challenging time actually getting to the kind of steady part of the hype curve where everyone's using it.
I think so. When you look at the structure of a sponsor, we are structured in a very fragmented way. So when you look at clinical research, from protocol development all the way to the writing of the CSR, every single process is part of a different group. Most every single process, and what we have found is that, at least in some of the companies that I worked at, there are 90 processes that are interrelated, meaning you cannot accelerate a clinical trial unless all those 90 processes are aligned. Because, you might accelerate patient identification, but if every other key critical process is not ready to go, you're accelerating a part, but you're not accelerating the whole. So imagine aligning all these departments and all the people in these departments and so on and so forth that are driven by different SOPs that were built who knows when, and turning that around is it's almost like moving the Titanic with the finger, right? That doesn't mean necessarily that we shouldn't keep trying. I think what happens is we have an incredible lack of understanding of how the ecosystem works. Therefore, we are experts in one area, but really don't understand the implications, the downstream and upstream implication of each individual process, which makes really adoption very hard because we're so risk averse that changing something requires sticking your neck out. And nobody got, decapitated, or nobody got slapped by doing the same thing over and over again. Right?
Yeah.
So taking risk, especially when the industry is in such a dire stage, is not something that we are willing to do. So I think it's going to take more of the outside partners, right, to start really showing us how it could be done differently. And I think what I'm seeing is I'm seeing a much more open stand or open stance in the regulatory departments, for example, to start thinking about different things. Start thinking about we could use AI to automate most of our protocols, right? Because when you think about what's changing, what's really unique, it's a very small part of the protocol that is unique today. You can use AI to write a big chunk of your protocol. We estimated that it was probably 70%, if not upwards of 70%. So why are we copying and pasting and doing exactly the same thing that we've been doing for years when we have the technology today and the data and the expertise to actually do it much better? So I think it's going to, in the next 5 years, I think there will be a seismic shift in the industry based on the rate of technology adoption that I'm seeing.
I'm gonna hold you to a 5-year prediction in a little while, so you can start thinking about what that's going to be. But one of the things that you're describing, and it really resonates with me, is it's sort of the great irony of our industry is that we are innovating really at an alarming rate. And I'm just talking about, I mean, the drug innovation, the therapeutic intervention innovation is huge. The technology innovation over the last decade. You've mentioned AI a couple times. There are many other innovations that we've brought to the way clinical trial data can be more quickly collected, more quickly aggregated, seeing signals faster, using artificial intelligence, and so on. But still, our industry tends to be relatively slow to adopt. And this phenomenon you described, I'm very familiar with it, this phenomenon and it's not just in pharma companies. Like, we have the same challenge of Medidata, right? You get a fragmented environment, lots of different departments, lots of different goal setting, and it can be hard to get everyone kind of serialized around one goal or objective to do something like a massive technology adoption. But it is ironic that these are the things that could accelerate clinical pipelines, bring more drugs to market, or kill drugs faster if they don't work. It's sort of all the great things that we could bring to accelerating this process are the things that are hard for us to actually get completely adopted into the process. But that said, I know you've seen a few. I know you've seen some things in your career that you and I have talked about before, where you feel like we're in such a different place today than we were at the beginning, or that thing that started as a little bit of a dream kind of became the standard way that things get done as a true disruption.
I mean, look at what we started with: internet, the technology with Mytrus, right? It was really a logistical nightmare because we didn't have the tools that we have today. Fast forward that, you did a study. What was it? The adaptive study with DCRI? Virtual study.
Adaptable.
Adaptable. That's right. So 6,500 patients?
15,000.
15,000. Wow.
15,000 patients. Yeah.
So my point is, now it's possible. We've demonstrated a little proof of concept, and then companies like Medidata, Concert AI, Medable, Science 37, Picnic Health. So they took pieces of it and said, okay, so we can have the patient do the informed consent and give us the informed consent, and we can build your registry. That's the Picnic Health model. Well, that was what we started with Mytrus, right? So the company took the patient consent, and therefore we can follow that patient wherever that patient goes. Doesn't matter whether it changes HCPs, changes insurance companies. It doesn't matter, right? Because I started with the patient. So to me, we have all the tools today. we can add in, right? So I started with Mytrus, and then as a head of analytics for R&D, I started thinking, okay, so we have real world data and we have AI. Why not then using real world data and AI to identify that patient population and then select not only the patient that could potentially qualify for that clinical trial, but where that patient was. Obviously, that was not available to me, but somebody else. So, in this particular case, I work with Concert AI, but the idea of doing what we started doing with Mytrus, which is there is a technological way to accelerate timelines and reduce cost using data, technology, and in this particular case, working with the sites, right? To identify a patient and actually serve that patient up for a PI to say, yep, I agree, it qualifies. This industry is never going to be pure technology. It is a relationship industry.
Of course.
So, but technology and AI and data availability is at a point where, as an industry, we need to move beyond the fear, right? Move beyond the idea that every single thing is going to have to be validated. That's not true. There are certain things that will have to be validated, right? And we'll pay attention to that. But we sometimes hide between the concept of validation because it's scary. It's scary to do new things, and it's scary, especially in this time of industry turmoil, to say, let me advance some ideas like Craig did and at Pfizer that may actually change the way we could do this. And let's segment things that could be done fully virtual or semi-virtual, and things that really, really require a clinical research site to do 30 tubes of blood in order to test 1,000 things that more often than not we don't use, right? It doesn't necessarily land on a regulatory filing. So that mentality of let's not take any risk, we're going to have to overcome that. If we're really thinking about accelerating drug to market, we cannot use the same methods that we've used for the past 100 years.
The technology is advancing at such a fast rate now, right? We've had an AI team at Medidata for almost 10 years. But the pickup of interest in AI in our industry over the last 1 year or maybe year and a half has just dwarfed anything we've seen over the entire 10 years that we've had that group, right? So we are in the part of the adoption curve now where everybody wants AI. Lots of companies are innovating at an incredible rate. But I think to your point, if we can't catch the adoption up a little bit with the innovation because it takes too long to validate or to agree to get over that risk aversion and actually try these new things, then it creates a big challenge. And we're also in a political and economic environment in our industry where there's a lot of, chaos at best, right? We don't know what's happening with funding. We don't know what's happening with agencies. We don't know what the international ramifications will be of decisions that are made here and so on. So all of this could even up the ante more for the value of innovation and speed and cost efficiency.
Yeah, without a doubt. But it also, we have to think about, I always smile when people come to me and said, oh, we have to do AI. So what does that mean? We don't do AI, right? We apply AI to very specific situations where that tool could be valuable. And for that, Anthony, you have to understand deeply where you're applying AI and for what. Meaning, if you have the opportunity to streamline a process with AI, but you don't understand in depth how the entire process works. Then somebody, right, from, I don't know, any function said, oh, let's use AI. Okay, that's great. To do what? Right?
Yep.
So it goes back to the understanding, the lack of understanding of the end-to-end process. Because if you do understand that, it's very clear where AI could be deployed and where it could really work. But the reality is, the higher up you go into the organization, the less understanding of the depth of the organization and the processes that drive all of that complexity. You just miss the idea of where could I apply it.
Yep.
Right?
And you miss the opportunity to choose the right AI, right?
That's right.
Because
That's right.
the AI itself has to have learned from a broad perspective of historical information in order to be useful at predicting,
Anthony, how many years is it going to take for us to realize that we can do data cleanup with AI?
Mhm.
I mean, I was at Amgen in the early 2000, right? When the clinical operations folks created a risk-based monitoring, soup to nuts, 24/7 data collection, and the understanding of where those data flags could actually be helpful to deploy CRAs. Early 2000, we were, using analytics to actually do data cleanup. So much so that, if I'm not mistaken, Amgen got to near 0 days between data cleanup and the statistical analysis. In many cases, they got there. So, and I think there are publications and so on and so forth. So, meaning, this is the early 2000s. There's absolutely no reason why we couldn't do that today. But we hold on to old processes of how we would do the data cleanup when it has proven over and over again that AI works on improving the data quality and identifying, issues. So why are we not bold enough to say, in 2-3 years, this is what I want. I want, all data cleanup to be done through technology, right? So then you free up people to actually upskill their capabilities and do a lot more work that is more on the kind of a value add, right? And so, to me, we have to take that next step.
It sounds like you're getting close to making a prediction, so maybe we can. Are you ready to do that? I mean, you've recently retired. I don't know, what are we calling it? Retired from industry, from
I think I went back. You know what? I just realized that I went back to when I left Amgen, which is, having a few technologies that I'm very passionate about, that I'm willing to take a bet on, and that I think, like Mytrus, are going to kind of change the way we will do clinical research. So it's almost like I went full circle.
Mhm.
Although I am enjoying retirement, I don't know if I told you, but I also had I had this vision of wanting to work with elite athletes on their mental skills. So I got a degree in sports psychology. So now I'm going to be working with high school and their sports team. So
That's great.
my time is filled with things that kind of drive my passion. And as I said, clinical research was also my passion. I don't know that I'm ready to just drop that entirely. But yeah, that's what I'm doing. And You talked about a prediction. So personally, I think when I think about clinical research of the future, if you're not the head of global development, I think you're gonna, have a really hard time not looking around, seeing a bunch of data scientists around you, because I do believe that there's a ton of opportunity in the industry to use AI if for a number of things, and really achieve the vision that we had with Mytrus, but in a much larger scale. Meaning, today, I see two trends. One is healthcare institutions, large healthcare institutions, saying, I can't have my PIs, and I talked to a bunch of them. I can't have my PIs and my coordinators enter data anymore. They're just highly paid. So I need technologies to do this for me. So I see a lot of HCPs actually partner up with integrators.
Yeah.
Like yourself, like Flatiron, like Paradigm, like Concert AI, and through AI, marrying the workflows between clinical research and medical practice, and kind of standardize that technology. Why? Because they're sick and tired of wasting resources in mundane, routine activities, right? So more and more, it's going to be the HCPs through the partners, the one that are going to say, sure, I can do your studies, but here's the platform that I'm willing to use, and not the other way around.
Okay.
So that's point number one.
So you see, just to make sure I'm understanding this, so you see a big move in, let's call it, healthcare data interoperability with EDCs or clinical trial tech that has to be, where the data have to be aggregated for regulatory delivery. Right?
Yes, and there's no other way, because think about this. We have APIs for everything, but not APIs for, let's say, labs. So I have to have API, the Merck lab API, the Pfizer lab API, and it's just time to build standardized APIs and interoperability frameworks that would allow the flow of data, regardless of what system you're using, right? And so I think the providers are pushing for that. And I think we're going to see that if we really want to reduce cost and accelerate timeline, look at that as a first step. The second one is, think about how much routine processes we have in clinical research. I mean, I can think of, I don't know, like 100, right? So I like the now where agent technologies are taking us, right? Where, you have AI playing a role, and you train that person or that system to play a role, whether it's data cleanup, whether it's a protocol review, right? So any process that is incredibly routine today can be done by an agent technology. Think about that when you have multiple agent technologies interacting with each other. There's a lot of processes, maybe all those 90 processes that we thought, that need to be interconnected, will be interconnected without having to, touch necessarily human hands, unless they are for kind of checking the accuracy of the data that is being developed, right? So all of a sudden you take, I don't want to say mundane, but I want to, things that take less work, right? Or less brain power, and you leave the computers or AI to do that. So then you can focus your precious people to do higher level activities, which I think everybody would appreciate. Well, maybe not everybody, but I think most people would appreciate. So I see the pickup of agent technologies, and I've seen a few prototypes already, and really exciting, really exciting stuff. And I would go all the way to saying, at least for some primarily US driven, because I think it's going to take more than 5 years to get Europe to drive towards data availability, interoperability, and so on and so forth. But at least in the US, I don't see the need to do, as I said, a safety study in the traditional world, or sometimes a long-term follow-up. Today we have all the tools to do that with technology. Think about the cost savings that we could drive as an ecosystem in the industry. It's just mind-boggling. It just takes partners to help sponsors think about how to do it, and sponsors willing to let partners with the technology, with the data, and so on and so forth, do what they're best at.
Yep. Well, and it's interesting because, and maybe we can kind of wrap up on this note, there's a lot of what you just said from a technology standpoint is coming. Some of it's already here. The agent technologies, as you know, many companies are developing them, day to day. There's huge shifts in how that part of the technology market works. But where it really becomes disruptive is when it gets adopted.
Yes.
And how it gets adopted. And I'll even say the more adoption that at least our customers have and are willing to share learnings, share, de-identified data across sponsor, like these are the types of data sets that help us teach the AI much faster and on a much broader set of experiences from lots of different therapeutic areas and lots of different diversity backgrounds and so on. So all of these things are in what I would call the adoption part of the curve. Like we can build perfect agents, but if nobody uses them. So it feels to me like there's a trend now of adopting and using these kinds of agents. But if you wanted to make the prediction for, let's just call it the next 3 years, let's say all the technology's there, but the challenge is in the uptake. The challenge is how do we price it right and get awareness about it and get comfort, whether it's validation or some other way of developing the kind of comfort that you need as a large-scale pharma company running hundreds of trials a year. How do we get those companies to the point that they can make the adoption, which actually creates the disruptive environment that we're all looking for?
Yeah. Well, there's always a Pfizer, right? So for us, I'm at Mytrus.
Pfizer was the one, yeah.
Pfizer was the one. Pfizer was the believer.
Yep.
And I do believe that you will have to go to 50 of them, right, to get that one. But they do exist. So I think it's incumbent upon all of us to continue to identify new potentials where we can deploy these capabilities and get over the the hump of, oh my God, what if it fails? I don't think it will fail miserably. Mytrus didn't fail miserably, right? So we fail in many ways, but we course corrected, right? And we open up the possibility, endless possibilities, really, when you think about it. So I wouldn't think that Craig Lipset will say, "Oh, that was a failure." Right? We learn a lot, and so I think we're in a similar situation from a we shouldn't be afraid, right, of trying. There's no failure because the technologies are such that we can course correct very quickly. There's no catastrophic failure, right? There's no risk of catastrophic failure anymore.
I mean, I would even argue that the biggest risk for catastrophic failure is we don't
Don't
move in
do
these
anything.
new directions, and these clinical development programs just die under the weight of their own cost
That's
and
right.
complexity and
That's right.
so on.
That's right. So that's one, and to me, medium-sized companies that don't have the infrastructure that behemoth have are probably might be more willing to adopt different things because in this day and age, what they need is for that drug to go into the clinic,
Yeah.
right? I'm pretty sure 5 years ago, the concept of delivering or creating drugs through AI was unheard of, right? Because it's like, no, you need your researchers, you need your preclinical people, and so on and so forth. We have 150 compounds that were AI touched going into the clinic or in the clinic already. Who in the world would have thought that that's the case, right? I think clinical research is probably the next behemoth. And as I said, there's a Pfizer. We just need to kind of find out which one would provide that vehicle for all of us to follow, and companies that have no option that to use different technologies to actually get their drugs through clinical research because they bank on that to either get funded. The funding situation is extremely difficult now, right? So I think those are going to provide a venue to do the quote unquote impossible. No, not that much so.
Yep. All right. Well, those are good predictions, and we're gonna count on your guidance in retirement or whatever it is that you're doing to keep influencing this industry. I know people that know you would agree with me that you've just made a huge impact on this industry over your 40 years. And I'm so happy that you were able to join me here today to share some of these thoughts. And thank you so much for the guidance you've given me over the years, and especially for starting Mytrus, which really was the beginning of my commitment to patient centricity that I'm still trying to carry forward here today at Medidata.
It's my pleasure, and as I said, I'm passionate about clinical research and patients, and I think it's easier to push things up the mountain when you're passionate about it. So
that's for sure.